Dr. Samantha Harte is here. We're hard launch. Okay. We're
going right in.
we got to get right to it. We don't have any, we ain't got no time to waste.
We ain't got no time to waste.
She's full of wisdom. Hey, you're a woman, I feel like, that can do a lot. My God. Author, Breaking the Circuit. Everyone should purchase it. We're going to talk about the book. Mom, doctor, physical therapy. You also, I imagine you probably are a sponsor or sponsee, helping other people be sober, stay sober. You do a lot.
I do.
A lot. Can women have it all? What's your take on that?
I think that can be dangerous to give us this illusion because we're already exhausted. Feeling like we have to please everybody except ourselves. My idea of a woman who has it all is a woman who is not put into a box. She's not just a mother. She's not just a wife. She's not just a businesswoman. She is a dynamic human being with a soul that is passionate about many, many things, who has a right to pursue those passions and break out of that box and be many things, not just one, and also to rest and to play and to seek out joy and laughter and pleasure. So for me, having it all is, I now cannot identify as just Dr. Harte. For a long time, that was fulfilling enough to be mom and to run a clinic. And through my lived experience, because I was tapped in through sobriety to my intuition, when she whispered and then I didn't listen and the whisper became a roar of like, we've got to shift here. We've got to pivot. And maybe that means abandoning everything we've ever known about life as we know it and go in this new direction because that feels more serving to my soul. Then I listened and I went in that direction. And now, yes, it's like, what don't you do? And people say to me all the time, how do you have time? You must be so busy. You're doing everything. And you can create an omnipresence on the internet.
Yeah, right. You can make yourself look like you're doing anything.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I do a lot, but every single day I put myself on my own schedule. That's one of my life hacks that I've been doing since the second I became a mother. Cause I thought, oh my God, I got postpartum depression with my first son. And I was like, if I don't figure out a system right away to hold myself accountable for taking care of myself, I'm going to drown in a sea of dying mothers everywhere who don't take care of themselves.
I like that answer, by the way. I think like having it all is almost a woman that like there's a level of calmness to her and a level of she's competing in her own race. You know, I like taking myself. My therapist sometimes says to me, you're allowed to take yourself out of the beauty race, which is women,
boy.
Right? We're always like, what product isn't about improvement, So my therapist will say to me, when's the last time you took yourself out of the beauty race? And I'm like, oh,
Man.
yeah. It doesn't mean you have to let yourself go. It just means, when are you doing stuff for you? And is this healthy for you? It's serving you and the right people. Okay, we sort of hard launched this interview, so let's hard launch this. I heard and read the day you got accepted to med school, you overdosed on cocaine. That must have been a hell of a day. Like, what a day.
I mean,
would you get the acceptance letter and then go on a coke binge?
100%. Listen, this was before I was sober, clearly. And this is the hallmark of a high functioning addict. This is the hallmark, right? It sounds insane, but I was culturally checking every single box. I was doing all the right things that all of you people out there in the world told me to do.
Because I would have thought you would have bought the 8-ball if you hadn't gotten in. But like,
oh no, addicts, we celebrate on a good day, on a mediocre day, and on a really bad day. Okay.
All the days.
The mantra was work hard, play hard. I had worked so hard academically to get into that program. I mean, I had no business trying to be a science geek. I was a creative. I was an artist. I took writing classes up the kazoo through undergrad, which was a 5-year stint. And that's a whole other part of my story, right? I graduate with this degree that doesn't get you into any kind of medical program whatsoever. And I'm like, wait a minute, I need all the pre-med courses. So for 2 years, and you can't just get a B in them, by the way. If you're trying to get a doctorate in physical therapy, you need A's. It is so competitive. So I needed all the tutors in all the land to switch hemispheres in my brain to get those. I was exhausted from trying to be so perfect getting all the A's. And just to get the acceptance letter was like the holy grail. And you better fucking believe that to offset the unrelenting anxiety that I was putting myself through because my inner critic was running my life. I was a raging perfectionist. The way I was going to find relief and celebrate was to do a massive amount of cocaine, which I had been doing in fits and starts. I was a bartender in New York City. So cocaine was everywhere.
That was like your tip. You know,
Absolutely.
It was like,
it's
line.
like,
yeah.
I had too many shots behind the bar. There's the coke dealer. Let's just get a little something, level back out, lather, rinse, repeat. So it was really no different than any other day, except that I was partying with a woman who did cocaine way harder than I did. And we clearly got way too much. And we had probably done it for more hours than I had ever done it in my life. Because I think we started in the middle of the afternoon and went into the evening.
Yeah.
And there I was, seizuring on the floor the day I got accepted into a doctoral program.
And did you come to on your own or somebody found you? Wow. You're lucky.
I did.
Wow.
Yeah.
I know you're lucky because part of your story is you've lost friends and your own sister to addiction.
That's right.
Really hard. So
Yeah, I should have been dead a million times. That was one of them.
I know, isn't that wild? That's what I was telling you. My brother, I believe it's 12 or 13 years sober. And, I know you guys know the program and I don't know how one person gets lucky to be here when, to your point, my brother's the same way. He's like, I should have been dead like 5 times.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know either.
You talk about a lot of trauma. Your book goes into a lot of trauma, breaking the circuit. But do you remember, because your story kind of resonates with me too. I lost my dad to cancer when I was like 13 or 14. Totally blew up my family. Nobody talked about grief, like 2 weeks of grief talk. And then we got to move forward.
Wow.
And that started my brother's addiction. And I probably was like an alcoholic-ish, but it's just a different gene. Some people can turn it off and some people can't, right? So eventually I kind of got control of it. And this is beginning to sound like I should probably be in
I'm just nodding my head.
Every addict is always like, I have control right before they lose control. Anyhow, so we'll see. Maybe I'll join the rooms. But I love an AA meeting. I've been to many with my brother. I freaking love an AA meeting. But do you remember the first time, like how old you were when you started drinking or first drug or cigarette? Like when did it start? What age?
I mean, when I'm really honest about it, I was going out probably at 11, 12 years old with a friend and picking up cigarette butts on the sidewalk and smoking them. Yeah. Right. So if I'm honest, it started really, really early and really young. And it was very minimal. It was I could take it or leave it. And it remained that way for a long time. I mean, the illusion of control was steeped into me. I also grew up around it. Drinking and using drugs was something I did that was really, really fun. And then I put it down and I was a straight A student. I mean, I was the girl going out with a fake ID in New York City when Sound Factory was all the rage, right? These wild nightclubs where ecstasy at the time was amazing. And I was, sneaking out, sleeping over. I don't know what my parents thought I was doing, but my sister was doing the same thing. So it was super normal for me. I was taking ecstasy from a random stranger and dancing for 6 hours, coming home 10 pounds thinner, and then waking up and, not wanting it again until maybe the next party. So it was there at a really early age, but it was sprinkled in and out. It did not become this daily habit until I got suspended from Boston University. Because again, in my dire attempt to be perfect, I had a professor for the first time in my life who wouldn't give me anything other than a C. And I plagiarized and he caught me. And I'd never plagiarized on anything in my life before or since. And this one time, how many people do you know in college who plagiarized? I mean, everybody did. And I got caught and the punishment was an 18-month suspension. And the shame of that was
18-month suspension.
I mean, how do you recover from that? And there was no way, right? And I was a sophomore.
By the way, you were just 20 years early because now I don't even think they suspend kids anymore. think my niece was tardy last year for like 60 days. She still graduated with honors. I'm like, in what world? Like they feel so bad now for these kids because of the pandemic. Like they can do anything. So that sucks because today you would have been fine. Really?
Yeah. No, I mean, I think it's interesting. My life is a string of wildly hard lessons. Like
wow.
Every single story is this like, what? That's how you had to learn the lesson of that? And the thing is, this is now a gazillion years in hindsight, right? At the time, the shame of it was so great that I was like, I'm not telling anybody the reason why this happened. What I'm going to tell everybody and myself is that I'm taking a year off from school to pursue becoming a star because I'd always wanted to sing and dance. And it was really that next year or two of my life when I moved to New York City and was like, watch out, Britney Spears, I'm coming for you, where I was bartending to pay my rent. And I was like, thank you. I was like, oh, drugs and alcohol are everywhere. So game on. That was the time in my life when it rapidly picked up. You know, until then in my youth, it was always there. It was always in the background. It was always normalized, but it wasn't a daily thing at all.
I think so many people can relate to having trauma in their childhoods, right? I mean, I do know a few people that had like idyllic childhoods. Their parents are still both alive. You know, there are some people that get through life with minimal scars, but most of us have pretty bad trauma. What were your parents like? Like, I mean, I think, right, we all come back to, especially with addiction, you can trace it. My brother and I can trace it back to that moment, you know, our dad died, right? What was for you? What was your parents? What was your childhood like where you go, oh yeah, I see how this kicked the cycle up?
Absolutely. I mean, I've done such a deep dive on this stuff. My parents were unhappily married. By the time I really remember coming online in early adolescence, what was going on is my dad was living in the basement basically because my mom was like, that's where you belong. I fucking hate you. And she told us all about why she hated him.
How old were you when that happened?
12.
Yeah, she was telling you. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, there were no boundaries in my house. So basically I had an emotionally absent father. I had a mother who was steeped in self-righteous anger, who had a raging eating disorder, who had a raging prescription pill problem. And she was having extramarital affairs on our dad and telling us about it. My sister was confused about her sexuality and sneaking out to raves and doing ecstasy. So for me, I was like, how do I hold this family together? And every time I speak up, I'm kind of told, don't do that again. So I can't trust my intuition. So I'm going to keep quiet and just sort of turn into whatever my family needs me to be to keep the peace. So I just became perfect.
Yeah, you excelled. Yeah.
I did what I needed to do to be loved and safe in my home. But it was game on. Everything was normalized, you know, and I was a girl in middle school and high school who was oversharing in an attempt to be loved by my peers. So I would tell them these things that were going on in my home. And then I was a lesbian and a slut, and I had a crazy sister, and I was a crazy girl. And, you know, so it was so traumatic because I didn't know any other way to build intimacy other than to overshare, which, you know, Brene Brown calls hot wiring intimacy, which is sharing with people who haven't earned the right to hear it. But I didn't know that. Yeah. So I couldn't wait to get out of there and then, you know, go to this new university and start over. And then I got caught plagiarizing and I got kicked out. So it was like, oh, wow. Okay. But it would be so many years before I would have insights like the ones I'm sharing with you, where I'm like, oh, no wonder I have so many anxious attachment issues. No wonder I relied solely on perfectionism to keep me safe and whole in the world. Even 5 years into recovery, like no wonder these things were so deeply ingrained. And the exposure to the 12-step meetings was vile to me in the beginning. I mean, the language on the walls came up against every childhood belief that kept me safe. I mean, my mother's word was God, period. And her word was such that anyone who believes in God is an absolute idiot. And the only person you can count on is yourself. And you better get your degree because nobody can take it from you. So don't be a star. Don't pursue your dreams. Ooh. There is no such thing as faith. So then you want me to, you know, I have a little cocaine overdose, but I have all these other things external to me that are going so well And now you're telling me I need God to get sober. I need a 12-step program. Fuck you. I remember going into that meeting the first time with this guy, Bobby, and I was like, absolutely not. And here's the thing. This is what we were talking about before we went online here, right? Hard and fast. When I started my practice as a physical therapist, which we'll get to, the way that it started was because I was like, this is bogus. This landscape for healthcare and this industry I'm entering after all this school and all this debt to try and really help people is completely backwards because we're just chasing down people's symptoms and we're never getting to the source of the problem.
Yeah.
Why? Because we're under the constraints of insurance. Insurance is
they
only
want you
going
to
to
be sick.
reimburse so much money,
Right.
right? So that means the therapist has to see 4, 5, 6 patients in an hour in order for the clinic to stay financially afloat, which means you're never going to have enough time to see whole body, whole person and get to the source of the problem. You're only going to treat symptoms. So my clinic was started off of that flaw where I was like, I'm going to be a cash-based practitioner. I'm going to be the person who, when insurance says, you're good enough, I'm going to get you from 60% to 100%. I'm going to get to the bottom of your knee pain, which is actually, by the way, coming from your hip and not your knee. And that's why you're not better, right? So I'm going into the 12-step rooms and I'm hearing all this stuff about self-centeredness and ego. And now, again, this is going to take me a long time to make sense of, but it's why I wrote my book. When we are focused on the shitty, self-centered nature of the addict, aren't we actually missing the mark? The addict finds a solution to their problem, which is drugs and alcohol. The problem is they feel inadequate.
Right.
They don't feel worthy of love, connection, and belonging, right? And they find solace in that pain through drugs and alcohol. That is the solution. Now we turn into, in an attempt to chase that down again and again, yes, very self-centered egomaniacs, right? But that's the symptom. The source is this deep shame and this deep lack of worthiness. Those steps miss the mark. They miss the mark on why I was stuck in ego, why I was stuck in my perfectionism. The steps felt unsafe to me. To let go of everything I had learned that kept me safe and just try to believe in some God that I couldn't see or touch or know when I had all this stuff outside of me that was proof that I was doing fine with the exception of this little drug and alcohol problem. They couldn't meet me where I was at. They didn't have a compassionate, trauma-informed language. And it is a miracle in recovery that I survived 5 years physically abstinent, even though I was dying a slow spiritual death.
Yeah.
It is a miracle that I did not relapse and die. And I think a lot of us do, because those steps have not been updated. They're a beautiful template, but they are not steeped in what we now know about addiction, childhood trauma, and psychology.
Yeah. So tell me about that. So you, because your book kind of rewrites the 12 steps, right? Like what you would like to see happen. So
Yes.
tell me what you're saying. So you feel like the 12 steps, what's missing? Like you end up kind of just focusing constantly on what is missing instead of healing from it and then moving on. Like, tell me that. That's interesting.
So my spiritual rock bottom was in a marital crisis 5 years into recovery, right? And how was I managing that crisis? Well, I wasn't going to God because I didn't believe in God, right? I was going to, I can fix this. Not only I can fix this, I will fix this. I will make this man tell me the truth because it seems like he's lying to me. I will make him forgive me for what happened on the front end of our addiction. I will make him love me again. And I exhausted every pattern I knew and ran myself into the ground and almost went insane in recovery. It didn't work. So then I was at a level of spiritual desperation, which I believe is very unique to the individual. Mm-hmm. We cannot force that upon anybody.
Yeah, totally.
Where I did not want to die. And I knew if I relapsed, I would die. But I absolutely did not know how to live. And this woman came in that moment in my life and said, what if we do the steps on your marriage? Well, that sounded really interesting to me. I don't know what that meant, but I am willing now to try that, right? So it looks something like this. Instead of I'm powerless over alcohol and my life has become unmanageable, I am powerless over my marriage. The fact that it's falling apart, the fact that anything I say or do isn't changing his mind. I'm powerless over the future of it. And when I try to exert power over this man to try to force him to see my side and love me again, my life becomes unmanageable in the following ways. Oh, I have no access to real peace or power because I'm waiting for it to come from outside of me. I have no sense of worthiness. I have no peace. I'm constantly obsessing and ruminating, right? I'm outwardly focused. And so we went through the steps like this, where we could practically change the language to the crisis that I was navigating. So it didn't feel religious. It didn't feel patriarchal. It didn't feel so archaic anymore. And the biggest thing that happened was the 9th step. So we go back to this thing about addicts, and that I haven't met yet an addict who comes into recovery who doesn't have shame that they're carrying around, right? Okay?
Everyone, but addicts, it's heightened because,
Yes, everyone,
obviously,
by the way. That's a good point.
once you do drugs, you're willing to do a lot more than like if you're sober,
Exactly.
I mean, that's the difference, right? But everybody has shame, right? There's no one, I just feel shame about certain interviews I've done. You just like look back, you're like, oh, that was, or you hurt somebody, all these types, but it's always magnified with booze and drugs, always, yeah.
Yes. Well, and then you get yourself into situations that
It's the worst,
are demoralizing, as they say in recovery, right? And so you come in, you're carrying around all this shame, and you get to the 9th step in recovery, and it's making amends. And I was 5 years sober. I had made many, many amends, even to my parents, who I was still so angry at, right? Trying to unpack the fact that they were also sick and suffering.
I know.
Could
right?
I see them that way, right? I had just done so much spiritual work trying to forgive everyone else and amend my behavior so that going forward, I no longer did those things to them again. Nobody had ever in my life, until this woman stepped in, said to me, have you ever made an amends to yourself?
Because that's not in the 12 steps. You don't really ever do that.
That is not in the 12 steps.
That's huge.
Every time I go to a meeting, every time I raise my hand, I bring that up. Because out of everything I did in that time in my life to reimagine the steps, and the way I've continued to do that and the way I've done that in my book, out of all 12 steps, none was so transformative as that question. And it's a question. It's a start. What would that mean to forgive myself? Yeah. What would it even sound like? What would it look like? What would it feel like? How would I see the current marital situation? Oh, wait a second. I might see it for what it actually is, not for what it used to be or what I dreamed it might become if he finally forgave me again.
Yeah.
But what it actually was, which was a shitty relationship that fulfilled zero of my needs, that I actually not only didn't deserve anymore, but I didn't want.
Yeah.
Right? So these are some of the tweaks. It's like the template is there.
Yeah.
It just needs to get to the root of the issue. How many more lives can we save if we came at the addict with a little more compassion? And it's not to let them off the hook, right? This is not the generation where there's no consequences and everybody needs a diploma and a certificate for doing a good job. No, it's not that. You hold yourself accountable. You right your wrongs. You say you're sorry when you make a mistake. You take a nightly inventory of what went well that day, what could have gone better. Do you owe anybody an amends, including yourself?
Yeah.
Right? You still do what's at the heart of those steps to have a spiritual transformation, but you're coming at it with just a few more tools. If someone had met me in those 5 years where I was really suffering, God, I see that you are stuck in this pattern of perfectionism. Man, that really served you. I see why you're doing that. That makes so much sense.
Totally.
You needed to do that as a kid. It looks like it might be hurting you now in your marriage. I wonder what it would look and feel like to let yourself off the hook, to let this whole thing be messy, to let what you did on the front end of the marriage be something that you did, but not a stamp for who you actually are. And if we could shift that and take this really violent negative self-talk and make it more compassionate,
Yeah.
what would that sound like? And the thing that happened in that sacred time in my life is that having a vehicle to clear the shame allowed me to hear my intuitive voice, which, remember, in my house, when I asked a hard question, it was shut down. I mean, one of my earliest memories as a girl was me asking my mom, why do you have to take those pills every night? Because it scared me to see who she turned into when she did.
Yeah.
Now I understand that. So I was confronting her. And then she said to me, do you like the things that you have? And of course I'm like, yes. And she meant all the material things.
Right.
Well, if you like the things you have, I need to make money. And in order for me to make money, I have to work. In order for me to work, I have to sleep. These pills help me sleep. That was the end of the conversation.
Right.
I learned never to ask those intuitive questions again.
Right.
And all of a sudden, I start making amends to myself. I start separating my behavior from my character, and I could hear my intuitive voice. And I knew it was some other voice besides my critical voice because it was so calm and curious and compassionate. And she started making these loving suggestions and nudging me in different directions. And I was like, well, this has got to be a better person inside of me to trust than the person I've been trusting. Because the person I've been trusting has led me into, I'm separated from my husband. I kind of want to die, but not really. And I'm everything's miserable between my ears, and I'm depressed, and this is not why I got sober.
So you do divorce. No, you're still with him. So you go through this.
Oh, girl.
Ooh, people are following along at home. Okay.
Oh, girl.
So
Our story is a Lifetime movie. It's crazy.
Okay. So as of today, how long have you two been together?
21 years.
Damn. And married how long?
11.
Wow. Okay. So you go through, you're like, at the point you're like, I think I'm done with this guy. I'm not really like in love with him anymore. We've been through the addiction phase. Like, I'm a different person. Okay, what happened that you guys stayed together?
Okay, so in this marital crisis, I couch surfed for months and months and months. Then I finally hit the ground.
Were you a mom at this point?
No.
Okay, so you didn't have
This
any
is
kids.
the saving grace of our story is that we hadn't yet had kids.
Yeah, I know, right? They magnify everything.
Oh, yeah.
Like if you're not solid in you and you ain't sober, I mean, and it's so sad how many moms and dads are addicts.
Yeah.
It's like so sad.
It's so sad.
It's so awful.
This was, for sure a saving grace here that we hadn't done that yet. We had done kind of everything else wrong, but not that, right? Like I was the liar and the cheater and he stayed with me anyway and he didn't heal from any of that and he had a pile of resentment, but we still trudged forward because I got sober and there was hope for a new future. So we got engaged and we got married. And then the marriage started to fall apart.
Yeah, sure,
right?
Sure.
So I'm couch surfing. I'm kind of homeless in my marriage. I'm thinking I'm going to spend like a weekend at my friend's place. And it was like 8 months later that my girlfriend in sobriety was like, if you don't get your own place, like if you're not ready to leave this dude, you need to figure your whole life out.
Yeah.
This is not sustainable.
Yeah.
And I was begging, can I move back yet? I was one that chose to move out because my sober feet were smart enough to be like, you guys are fighting every single day, every single second. You're like dying inside. You cannot be in this house, but you're not ready to leave the marriage. And yet, once I moved out, it was like a constant begging when the next person was going to kick me out of, can I please come back? Can I please, do you forgive me yet? Do you love me yet? It was really such a sad time, and he's like, I don't know what to tell you. Like, we're not ready yet. So I signed the lease. I do this healing work, right? My lease is about to go up. We're in therapy with a new person. I feel like a brand new version of myself. And I was questioning my marriage, but I wasn't resound on it's over yet. I just knew that the version I had, I didn't want anymore. So I was like, maybe on the other side of this healing process for me, there is a new version, right?
Yeah.
He seems to be doing better. I seem to be doing better. My lease is going up. I move back in. Also, though, my intuition was like, we should keep this apartment just in case. She's like, maybe just turn it into like your fitness center, right? Because at this point now I was treating patients in someone else's clinic making $0, like $33 an hour. I was so broke.
Yeah.
And I started to see patients on the side doing strength and conditioning because I was trying to fill this gap that I said in the healthcare market. And I'm like, what if I keep this apartment, because it was a mixed use building, and turn it into a little fitness studio?
Great idea.
The price was really right at the time. Like rent was $1,400 in this gorgeous loft apartment.
Those were the days.
Those were the days. So I kept it. I moved back in with my husband. And within days, I was like, it's not me. It's you. I mean, he still couldn't look me in the eye. He still rejected me sexually. Everything about his presentation of him being emotionally absent was the same. I was different. And I looked at him after a week or two and said, I don't want to do this anymore. And he dropped to his knees and he begged me to stay. And my intuition was like, you can stay, you can go. You're going to find out everything you need to know no matter what. So just, I got you, girl. So I was like, I was so exhausted from moving in and out. So many times I was like, I'm not fucking leaving yet, but fine, you know? And within a couple days, I found out because this woman he was having an extramarital affair with on and off for 5 years, emailed me with every single text receipt, hotel receipt, photographs of them together, email exchanges. I mean, the depth of the story and the betrayal is so insane. I'll give you an example, right? So when we were engaged, planning our wedding, we were living in this apartment. So I was brand new to LA, very early in my sobriety, clearly not working a program, right? Running on my perfectionism. And I open my laptop and I see all these emails from somebody named Elizabeth. Don't know an Elizabeth, with a no subject in the headliner. Now, my husband's really tech savvy. I'm not. I don't click any of the emails. I don't open one of them. I say, hey, babe, I think like I have a virus on my computer. Can you come check this out? He goes and checks it out and he says, you definitely have a virus. Do not open this. I come to find out, okay, when this girl sent me an email, when I finally find out everything that's been happening, she said in the start of the email, I know you told me to leave you alone, but you have to help me get rid of him. That was the opening line of her email. Could you imagine? What happened in that virus is that she was rigorously trying to contact me 3 years earlier to say, he's fucking cheating on you. I'm the other woman. Let's take him down.
Oh my God.
He calls his best guy friend, who was a chronic cheater, and says, I don't fucking know what to do. I'm in the shower. He says, you have to write her back as if you're Sam. Oh, and tell her, we're working on our marriage. Please leave us alone. So he did. And I never heard from her until that email 3 years later.
Wait, why'd she? Because they kept on the affair. So she then.
So he was trying to let her know, because he cheated on me before I got sober. I had cheated on him 1,000 times, and he was like, you know, one of those really good codependents who wants to leave and is really angry but doesn't know how to say this isn't working for me anymore.
Wow.
So his way out was to cheat. He cheated on me with her, right? And then I got sober and I fucked his whole plan up. And he was like, oh shit. So he tells her, like, no more, right? So he's trying to finesse this, like, go away. So he acts like I'm writing to her saying, I know what happened. We're trying to work on our marriage. And then that was the plan. We were trying to work on the marriage, and I become obsessive, and I'm not blaming myself at all, right? But he's pulling away because he has all the guilt from what he's done.
Sure.
I'm accusing him that he must be cheating on me. He's looking at me going, you're the fucking cheater. I'm not the cheater. So I feel insane, which is why I go insane in recovery. Meanwhile, he invites her back in because stuff between him and I is so bad that he just caves, calls her again, and that was it. So all that time that I thought he was cheating on me, he was. He invited her back into his world. He was constantly leaving and going on trips. So here I am. I just moved back in, and I find out he's been cheating on me on and off with the same woman for 5 years.
Okay, so you guys are still married today? Uh-huh. How did you? Okay, what?
You like that?
That is like,
I know.
You guys must have gotten real. Like, okay, so it was this. You found this great marriage therapist. Is that kind of who really saved you guys? Like that made you? How are you still together today and you trust each other?
Here's what happened after that. Let's just take a second, because remember, I was a wild sexual beast in my addiction, right? I was fucking whoever I wanted, men and women, whenever I wanted, regardless of being in a monogamous relationship, right? I get into the marriage, I'm newly sober, my husband's pulling away, and I'm like an animal in captivity. I put my tail between my legs and I'm like, I deserve, punishment fits the crime. He can reject me, I fucking deserve this, right? So I lose touch completely in my sobriety of who I am, my sexual power. I feel like just like I'm shriveling up and dying inside, right? But I can't act out on it because it's my fault in the first place anyway that this is fucking happening. Then I find this out and I say, fuck you into fucking eternity. I'm out. I try to stay in the house because I'm like, you leave. You fucking find. I just found 8 places to live for 2 years. You figure it out. And then I just thought, he kept coming around and memorializing our lives and leaving all the ticket stubs to every place we'd ever been on the front porch. And I was like, you know what? I know how to move. I know how to do this. You want to keep this shitty house tainted with all these memories, this 3-bedroom house that I don't need, that costs a lot of money. You stay here. I'm out. I have my studio that's now my business, by the way, called Strong Heart Fitness, which is still under operation today. Amazing. And then I get an apartment in Brentwood. And I go on a fucking spree. Literal fucking spree. I fuck every single thing I possibly can. And quite frankly, I wish I would have spent a little more time out there.
This is sober.
Sober. I am like wetting the bed with pleasure. That little animal that was stuck in that cage just flew out and was like, you. And I mean, I had filed separation papers. I was like talking to the lawyers, like doing all the things. I was done. And then this little fucker starts to go to 12-step meetings, starts to heal.
Wait, is he an addict too?
No, but there are 12-step meetings for everything. Right. Everyone, everything, food, every addiction.
Yeah.
You know, he needed some kind of intervention. The reason this all happened on his side of it is because he had absolutely no tools. Just like I didn't have any, he had no tools to handle the fact that he was in love with an addict.
Yeah.
So he just sought revenge, right? There was a huge downside to that. There were repercussions now, and serious ones, because we were married. So now he's in therapy, individual therapy. Now he's in 12-step meetings. Now he's doing all the healing work. And I remember being about 8 months out of this separation, 18,000 sex partners later. And I was like sitting with myself, right? I was sober. I had a relationship with my intuition, and my intuition was like, are you sure you're done? Oh my God. It was like if she was here, and the rest of me, the rage, the fucking betrayed, hell hath no right fury like a woman scorned. Like that other part of me was here. This part of me was like, are you fucking kidding me? Are you sure? What do you mean am I sure I'm done? Right? Because of course I was sure. And it was so sweet because my intuitive voice was like, if you're done,
wow,
be done. I've got you. We are going to be fine. I know you want to be a mother. You thought it was going to be with him. Like your perfect baby is coming. You just don't know when or how. Like you're going to be fine. You know how to land on your feet now. But if you're not done, if there is any part of you that feels like on the other side of this fucking disaster, you could have a happy life with this man, you might need to stay. I'm just suggesting, right?
Wow.
And so then I had to sit with that knowing, with that possibility of a different future. And that's the thing, like they say when you hear, it's like reading a book. You can read a book 3 times and only the 3rd time you read it, that one line that you read a zillion times, you hear it when you're ready to hear it, right? I couldn't unhear the voice of my intuition. I had to consider what she was saying. At the very least, that's what I could do. And so I would just meditate and see what came up in that space. And every single time I meditated on this, the vision was the same. It was like me staring through the darkest tunnel. And at the very end of it, there was a fucking match that was lit. And I could not make sense of it in any other way than there is the tiniest flicker of hope for a happy life with this man. And so
you just knew it.
I made the decision after that year in that apartment in Brentwood to reconcile and work it out. And now we have 2 babies and a big ass house in the suburbs.
How was it easy to trust? I mean, you both cheated on each other. So was it easy to trust one another? Okay. What was like one thing that you were taught or you guys discovered about yourselves that like you could come back to, like, we're going to trust?
So, I mean, whatever, these terms are thrown around all the time, but legitimately I had PTSD. I mean, I was gaslit for 2 years. I was literally told what I believed to be true was not true. And it was. Okay. I was rejected sexually so much. And there's 2 things that were real breakthrough moments for us, right? So if I were in the kitchen and I were saying something to him about the house needing to be clean or something, and the way he responded in that moment was kind of dismissive, right? Like my feelings didn't matter. The level of my reaction would be at like a 10. But we were talking about, the dishes. So we're talking about like a level 1 problem.
Yeah.
And I'm at a level 10. Now I have so much sober awareness and time in therapy that I am able, so we have a fight about it, right? About the dishes. And I'm like, what is happening right now?
Yeah. What's really going on?
And I realized that same dismissiveness was what was happening every time I said, are you cheating on me? And he said, what are you talking about? I'm not the cheater, you are. I was completely activated from our past in the present. Okay. That's literally like the hallmark of PTSD.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's the hardest thing for people, like how you unlearn that, right? Because you can't forget it.
Yep.
But you got to change the pattern to get a different result.
So I notice it. And then I say, hey, I'm realizing what that actually was. Here's what's really coming up for me right now. I'm totally reactivated about this time in our relationship and it's coming out sideways. And I'm sorry, I'm doing my best to work through it. I love you. And he would literally I would start crying a lot of the time in the beginning. He would meet me there and he would hold me. And he would say, I love you. I'm so sorry that this is so hard.
Yeah.
We were literally rewiring and having a new experience in the pain. So it didn't stay a trauma memory, right? It became a way forward. Oh, this is how we're going to rewrite this story. Now, the next level of healing was sexually. So after several years of feeling like, oh, he's all in. Like, I don't think this man is a chronic cheater, that he's going to, that's the other thing is I was able to see the arc of our whole story. And this is really important. Okay.
Yeah. This is great because, my husband and I go to an emotional cognitive therapist we have for years, which is basically practicing exactly what you're saying. Like when things come up, it's like slowing it down and feeling the emotion underneath it. And like every session we end up crying together, you kind of, because there's so many things in life, right? He was raised differently than I was. Now we have a child. You can't help but have fears and anxieties of the world, but you've got to like find a balance, right? But the thing that like she was, always saying is kind of like the rewiring that you're talking about, right? And the trusting and like moving forward. Yeah. It's so good. Keep going. No. It just reminds me of the work everybody, everyone should do. And the hard part is like she would say to us, because my husband and I went through that before we were married a little bit, not like the breaking up and then, hooking up with other people and coming back. And are we going to do this? And what was the holdup and all these things. And then, we had to learn to just change the whole thing and trust one another. But it's very hard for people to overcome the cheating. And our therapist would always say like, no, sometimes cheating actually brings people together. Like the best relationships started from like a cheating situation. And we're like, what?
I know.
And she'd be like, oh yeah. And we thought we moved together. We were living together and we were having a really hard time when we met her. And she's like, oh yeah, you guys maybe we'll find out in a few sessions you two need to move out. And I was like, no, if we move out, we're never moving back in. She's like, no, that's false. She's like, a lot of people move back out and move back in. I'm like, what? So it's so interesting. I think it's great that you made it because there's more couples than you think that have been through cheating. One person is cheated, the other, and then they actually go on to have healthy relationships. It's kind of crazy.
Oh yeah. It's so important to talk about this. And also, listen, I grew up in a house where it was like,
well, you
would never take, or if you did, you would come back and just have a permanent middle finger up for the rest of your life at that person. Like there was no such thing as forgiveness. So I was really coming against what I was taught,
Sure.
which is amazing, right? Because everyone, even my sober community, they had only known me sober in LA, and they'd seen me go through this horrific sleeping on couches, homeless period in my recovery. And they're like, you're not gonna take him back.
I know.
Right? Okay. And here's the thing. Here's the other like amazing thing about the story is that when I stretched the lens and made it wide, because if I could zoom in only on that time, he was a fucking asshole into perpetuity,
Sure.
and I would still be walking around with anger, and very justifiable anger at that, okay? But because I could zoom out and say, wait a second, at one time in my life, I was an addict who was a liar and a cheater with no dignity and no grace. And now I'm this sober woman who's a powerhouse, who's made a radical transformation. Could it be possible that I was the untreated addict and he was the untreated codependent? And that on the other side, with a lot of healing and a lot of work and a lot of forgiveness, he too is actually not a bad person. He's a really good person who made really bad choices.
Sure.
Just like me. Is that possible? And yes, it is. And we do not know how to do that. We do not know how to zoom out. The hardest part about the forgiveness process was sexually, because even after enough time was under our belt where I was like, oh, he's, like I said, he's all in. You know, I remember calling my therapist. He stopped going to meetings. We had a baby together now. And I called her and I was like, this fucker, he fucking lied to me again. He did what he needed to do to get me back. And now he stopped going.
Yeah.
Right? And she said, okay. It sounds like you have a belief that a woman will only take a man back who betrayed you at the level he betrayed you, if and only if he's doing this, this, and this. And now he stops. So this belief system is kind of coming undone, right? So your worthiness is wrapped around this belief. Is there a world that exists where your husband never goes to another meeting again, never goes to therapy again, but he's 100% in? He loves you. He's not a cheater. He's an amazing father. He's an amazing husband. Is there a world in which, and I said, I don't know. Now I have to consider, it's like my intuition again.
Right,
now I
right.
have to consider that, right? I'm here to tell you. He has never gone back. Okay? He's never gone back. So he did a lot of work in that first year that we were reconciling. He's never gone back. I said, but sexually, it feels like that's the last place. Like I just can't fully be vulnerable again.
Yeah.
Like the level of rejection that happens sexually is where all the betrayal shows up. Like I believe he's in the marriage. He's desiring me sexually in a way that I wanted him to for so long. And now I'm stuck in between my ears. I cannot surrender and enjoy. And she's like, is there anything else he could do to show you how much he loves you and wants you? And I really thought about that, because if there was something else he could do, I was going to ask him to do it. But there wasn't. And then it just reminded me back of that analogy of the animal in the cage. And I thought, something happened to me when I got back into this marriage and decided to forgive him. I went back into the cage, but I'm the one that locked it.
Yeah.
And the only way forward that I could see whether or not we were just at the end of what we could do, right? Like maybe we did everything we could and we really love each other, but we can't move forward in this way. Like maybe we'll be co-parents and maybe we'll, like maybe it's just done. And I had to see it through up until this point, because that was a possibility, right? That I just couldn't fully get over what happened between us. And I thought, okay, the last thing for me to try is to self-liberate. It means I have to walk myself out of that cage. If every time we're about to be sexual, I find myself in that cage again, I need to stand up and puff my chest and open the door and walk out of it. And what does that mean? That meant that by the way, to this day, if there's even a second where I'm getting too heady, which by the way, women struggle
Happens
with,
to everybody.
period.
Yeah, I mean, it's
okay. It was
just everyone,
just exacerbated by our circumstances.
Yeah.
I need to moment, honor the call of my body. So if he's initiating something and I'm not into it, and then I'm going to be like, no, I flip myself around. I stop kissing on the lips like we're in high school and I fucking do something. I do whatever my body wants to do every single second of that sexual interaction. And I self-liberate moment by moment by moment. We have a thriving sex life. Okay.
But you got to both show up, right? Isn't that the key?
Yes.
Isn't that the key? And that's the thing with my husband, because we played all these games before getting married, mostly on my part, and like grass is greener syndrome. I'm like, could I do better? You know, I mean, you play all these things, right?
Oh,
like,
God, yeah.
I could find somebody richer and hot, all these things that you tell yourself, right? But he just always showed up. And I had my brother and my mom. It was funny, how like lots of times you tell people and they're like, leave him. My mom and brother would be like, if you leave this man, like you are never going to find anyone better. Like nobody puts up with you. No, like they would never side with me. And I just like realized one day, I'm like, oh my God, like he shows up to do the work. Like you were asking, don't you think that's the sign? Like, because a lot of people won't show up for you. And those are the people that are not your people. But when you have a man like what you have, what I have,
Absolutely.
that like will go to therapy, will do a 12-step, would do one more thing to make sure you are sexually into it. I mean, that's like a pretty damn good man. Like because my therapist always says to me, and she would say to me when I was back and forth about my husband, she's like, Sarah, doesn't matter what man you have. They're always going to have something. They might be hot and bad with finance. They might be, good looking, but they're not so spicy in the bedroom, or that you've got to pick what is it that you are okay, that you can deal with. And I always say, like, my husband, we're yin and yang. Like, I'm super outgoing, enthusiastic. My husband wakes up every morning, like, needs space. I'm like shot out of a cannon, like, let's go. So it's like, and I used to always think, don't I want somebody with more personality and everything? But he really lets me be me.
Yeah.
And like, it's sometimes great for one person to be the star and the other person like just supports the star,
Yep.
So it's all about showing up though, isn't it? And actually taking action. That's how you know you got a good one.
100%. But that's every relationship, right? Like every friendship breakup I've ever been in, right, is because typically it's not that two people have to always be growing in tandem, but when shit hits the fan, if both people are not willing to show up and try to repair the rupture, or can't mutually at least decide, you know what, this rupture happened and this is the end of our soul contract. We were in this codependent thing because it was old trauma bonding, and now we're going to go off on our merry way to heal and actually invite in the types of relationships or romantic relationships that we really want and need. It's never going to work.
Yeah.
Right? Like I've had friendships end at different times that I wasn't ready to have them end, but someone else was.
Sure.
And I think back now, God, I was so willing to do the work, but they weren't. They weren't.
Yeah.
And so it ended.
Yeah.
Even though it made me so sad, right?
Yeah.
You always have to have two people who are going to fight and get back in the arena.
Yeah.
Right? And get bloody and sweaty together. Or there's no way forward.
I have a couple last questions for you because I want you to promote you like you said, you're doing a lot of great things, like really deliberate work, like things that you want to do. But I think people listening to your incredible story wonder, what happened to your parents? Are they still alive?
Yeah, that's a great question.
You ever talk to them about this? I mean, parents are so fascinating because I always say once the older you get, it's a complete role reversal. They're the child, you're the adult, and you just have to see them for, what they went through.
Yep.
Yeah. Tell me about yours. Where are they at now?
My dad passed away 5.5 years ago, and it was rather sudden, and our relationship was strained. He continued to be the family enabler all through my sobriety. So even though I'd made 1,000 amends to him, I was still always so angry. And that really haunted me for the first couple of years after he died, that I showed up to every interaction with a chip on my shoulder. And I really tried to outrun my grief there. I felt so powerless over not fully reconciling all those feelings before he died that I tried to run from them. And I had a raging eating disorder in recovery. This was not that long ago, right? So the relationship with him was very complicated. He was sort of my drinking buddy. And when I got sober, that was really hard for him. When I would spit truth in his face in recovery about his codependency with my sister and my mother, he would be a little jarred by that and seemingly would hear me for a moment and understand the gravity of what he was doing and then slip right back into denial land. So, I've come to peace with much of that. And, again, he was literally doing the best he could with the very, very, very limited tools that he had.
Yeah. Well, the older you get, you begin to realize how they were raised, right? And how what they went through. And then you're like, oh yeah, no wonder. It's it's hard because you think, but that's why I do feel like we're living in the greatest time because I think you were raised Catholic. No, were you raised Catholic? No, you had no religion.
I was raised confused.
Well, okay, I was raised Catholic and confused.
We celebrated Hanukkah and Christmas. And then Hanukkah disappeared when my dad went to the basement. And then it was just Christmas, but not for the religion, just for the presents.
It's so hard though. Like you see what they went through but today we're living in the best time because I think when my dad died, which was 97, it wasn't that long ago, big time for Catholics. Like they thought you were nuts if you went to a therapist, like you were crazy who went to, that was a belief for most people until the past, I'm going to say like 15 years, right? Now it's become mainstream, all these great health things. I mean, people take acupuncture serious. They take therapy serious. We're living in the greatest time for the next generation because our parents and grandparents, like they went through such shit and like, nope. You were an alcoholic. You beat up your wife. Like nobody said, hey, like we all need therapy. Everybody, even if you had a great childhood, there's just things that your parents do out of their own fears and anxieties that sometimes it's out of love. It's just like it's the helicopter parent, right? It's like, I love you so much. I don't want anything to happen. So you can't go anywhere. I mean, it's so yeah. What about your mom? Like, did she?
My mom is still alive and it's very complicated. So she later in her life, I always felt like, why is she so sad? That was the other thing about my childhood. Yeah. She was, clinically depressed and untreated, which is probably why she was self-medicating. And I always wanted to make her happy. Always.
Sure.
And so, getting those good grades was one of the ways to do that. And somewhere in her adult life, she started having manic episodes. And when I tell you I've had to acutely hospitalize her in a psych ward more times than I can count, I'm not lying. So she's been diagnosed with bipolar disorder. And, I moved her out to California. She was in New York in a living facility after my sister and I had to basically have an intervention with my dad who didn't want to spend the money because they were still legally married, even though they were separated. It was like such an enmeshment. She was in this facility that was very expensive that he was kicking and screaming to have to pay for. And finally we were like, she's going to die under her own bad decision-making if we don't get her into a home. That place ended up closing down. And this was about 8 months after my sister died. And I was like, can you please come out here? And she seemed like in a stable period. I didn't know if she was taking her medication. I wasn't fully clear, but I just thought even in the worst case, if she goes off the rails again, at least I have my sober community, my husband, my family, and she's network. 2 miles up the road. And I'm not like constantly having to worry and go again 3,000 miles away to deal with a sick mother, a dead mother by myself on an airplane, which is what I had to do with my sister and my father, right? I was like, at least she will be nearby. And I moved her out here, and within a few months, she went manic again. She's blown through all the money that she had. She's still, by the grace of, I guess we can say God, because again, by the time my dad died, they were still legally married, and he was a teacher. She gets his pension. If it was not for that, she would be utterly financially destitute, living on the streets right now. She got kicked out of the living facility that she was in because that's how it goes when she's manic. She's extremely volatile and irritable,
so
and she's living out of a motel right now and has just become not manic all of a sudden in the last 2 months. I've never had to set firmer boundaries in my life.
So hard.
as I've had in the last year. You know, she was in my children's life, and then she would show up to the house with strangers, and it became really unsafe. So I hadn't seen her in almost a year. And I started to tell by the messages she was sending me that something was probably switching in her brain chemistry. By the way, I intervened in all the ways I could. I mean, I went with her to a psychiatrist and a physician, and we tried to stabilize her on meds. And it's just this horrible hamster in a wheel situation with bipolar, because you feel so good when you're manic. It's like being on all the ecstasy
Like
in
the
the
highest
world. Like the
high, yeah.
dopamine never stops. And so you don't want to crush that by being bombarded with something that's going to make you feel like you're catatonic. And unfortunately, the level at which they have to give you drugs when you're unstable is such that you feel like you're underwater. So she didn't want to do it. So she, after one whole year of mania, blowing through $80,000, getting kicked out, and now basically being homeless, living in a motel, she's no longer manic, and she's back in my life. And I'm able to just enjoy my mother, who seems to have come back from the dead. This is sort of the story of my life with my loved ones, is people are ghosts for a long time. They're a shell of who they really are. Their body is there, but their spirit is dead. And then they come back, and or they leave forever, like my sister did. So for just for today, she's back, and she sees my kids every Friday. And I just try to hold on desperately to the memory that I have while I have it. But it's a day at a time.
Dr. Harte, a lot of people are going to be able to relate to this, though. Tell me what your favorite thing is that you're working on now. Obviously, people can find you, Dr. Samantha Harte, on Instagram. You have the studio still here in Thousand Oaks, California, for anybody that's local. You have the book, Breaking the Circuit, which everyone should buy, available on Amazon. What's your favorite thing that you're working on right now?
There are two things I'm working on. One is my coaching practice, which is a much more robust version of Dr. Harte as the PT, right? Because I'm also a certified life coach. And now I get to take those 12 steps in my book and use them as the spiritual side of wellness while I'm working on somebody's body. So I have this 12-week coaching container that is super transformative, and I think a very unique way to not just the science of what I've studied, but the soulfulness of my lived experience, right? There's 1,000 life coaches out there, but I happen to be a doctor of physical therapy who teaches you how to prevent injury. And I have this 12-step template, whether you're an addict or not, for how to get through life's hardest things, right? So that's the coaching experience. The other thing that is probably as important to me is I want to be, you're going to hear it here first, one of the most successful paid public speakers on earth. So I am gunning to sell out stadiums and get seriously paid to share my story, to make as big of an impact as I can. So I have coaches for that. I'm getting in all the right rooms. I say yes for free. I've also created my own speaking event called Heart Conscious Creators, which doesn't have a single spot yet. You know, our last one was this past Saturday in North Hollywood. I've done it in Hollywood. I've done it in Malibu. But getting people with amazing stories, successes in business, in life, career pivots, grief to joy, right? Tragedy to triumph, on stages, sharing their stories. And it's merged with a concert element because I'm now making original music again, which is another amazing part of my story. So it's sort of like the greatest speaking event and concert merged together. So while I am waiting to be tapped on the shoulder to be a successful paid public speaker, I am creating my own destiny.
Oh my God, good for you. God, we all need it. And you have an incredible story to tell and to share with people.
Thank you.
How exciting, girl. Okay, well, you've got to come back. Now we've met.
I mean,
we're local. I'm so honored to meet
love
you.
to
I
come
can't
back.
wait to hear more. Next time we'll block 3 hours because obviously you and I could. And next time I'll book. You never know with guests. Some have a lot to say and some have very little. You and I could do. I mean, we only got to basically chapter 1.
It's true. I mean, the marriage is its own episode, isn't it? So,
dude, your speaking events, like you can bring the hubby up. You can bring the mom. You can bring. You've got everything. Grief to try. I mean, when you say, I think what people will take away today, a lot of things, but I think, sometimes, you have to learn lessons really hard. And then, you know, but within that, right, is your superpower to give to other
Absolutely.
people. And I just think that's one of the great things about the internet. And all, it's like you can literally, any thought you're feeling, like no matter low, shame, perfection, you can Google it and you can find somebody's story. And that's the beauty of the program, right?
Yep.
Sometimes you walk in the room and the person speaking is telling your story.
Yep.
That's like where the magic happens. So, all right, Dr. Samantha Harte, we love you. And we're looking
you.
forward to next steps. Thanks for stopping by the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
Loved it. Girl.